next door neighbor in Seabrook, and he sends me a text like a 911.
By the way, this is what it looks like.
He said, "Wheels,
Yes,
I just shut the water off outside
All right,
your
cool.
house." The way he knew about it was there was water coming out of the front door, like underneath the front door, around the slab,
That's what happened.
and down the driveway. And so, unfortunately, I've been running for 2 or 3 days. And so it's completely, the bottom floor is completely destroyed. So I lost everything.
When I was calling for sending out the if you need me a text with my cell phone at the time, my brother-in-law came over. He's sitting in the front door in the middle of the street.
Come here.
Let me ask you to just stay outside for just another second. The rain's going to hold off, I promise. And if you redirect your attention a little bit to your left and behind.
Here they come.
Here they come.
Again. I was like, oh, look, there they are gone.
I was just so.
Scott.
We might make some noise.
Did you?
Again, I thought for sure it was going to happen. It's one of those things where it's like, if it didn't happen at Quantum, it was going to happen then. So, that is.
Thank you all for coming today as we honor one of Toledo's most celebrated citizens and formally rededicate our airport and transportation hub in the name of Eugene F. Krantz. A lot of people to thank for making this happen today. Columbia Gas, Toledo Edison, Owens Corning Foundation, Mayor Wade Kapsakavich, the City of Toledo and the Toledo Lucas County Port Authority, the Lucas County Commissioners, Block Communications, Central Catholic High School, the Toledo Community Foundation, and NASA. I also want to recognize some of those present here today, including Krista Luttman, representing Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, Gayla Scheffler, representing U.S. Senator Rob Portman, Senator Sherrod Brown sends his regrets he couldn't attend today, as well as Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, who also sends her regrets that she couldn't make it today either. Congressman Bob Latta is here. Colonel Michael DiDio, commander of the 180th Fighter Wing, Ohio National Guard. Ohio Representatives Mike Sheehy and Lisa Sebecki. Representing NASA, along with Colonel Wheelock, who you'll hear from shortly, is University of Toledo graduate Dr. Robert Dempsey, NASA Flight Director for the International Space Station at Johnson Space Center's Mission Control in Houston. We're also joined by many members of the Krantz family, the Mayor, County Commissioner Byers, multiple members of the Toledo City Council, the Port Authority Board of Directors, and Central Catholic High School community. We also have 11 students from Toledo Public Schools, Aerospace and Natural Science Academy with us today. Many more are watching from home, including many people with NASA and others across Ohio. But I want to specifically acknowledge today Marta Kranz, Mr. Kranz's wife, Jeannie Kranz and Lucy Kranz, two of Mr. Kranz's daughters, Mark Kranz, Mr. Kranz's son, and Tom Hendricks, retired colonel in the U.S. Air Force and a former NASA astronaut who is commander of the STS-70, dubbed the All-Ohio Crew. Now to introduce Thomas Winston, President and CEO of the Toledo Lucas County Port Authority, which operates the Eugene F. Krantz Toledo Airport.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. As Scott mentioned, I am Thomas Winston, President and CEO of the Toledo Lucas County Port Authority, and I am proud to be here today as operator of the now Eugene F. Krantz Toledo Express Airport. would like to acknowledge and thank Mr. Eugene F. Krantz and his family for making the journey to participate in today's dedication. We are humbled that you could be here today with us. I would also like to thank Central Catholic Marching Band and Glee Club for their great performances, and the 180th Fighter Wing for their flyover to mark today's tribute. And lastly, thank you, Mayor Katsakavich, the City of Toledo for your partnership in hosting this event, and to all the event sponsors. Without your collective generosity, today would not have been possible. The Port Authority is honored that our local airport is now named after a local legend, known throughout the field of space and aeronautics across the globe. You will hear a lot about Mr. Krantz's accomplishments this morning, but I would be remiss if I did not also briefly acknowledge his tremendous story. After developing a passion for spaceflight at a young age, Mr. Krantz joined NASA in 1960, where he contributed to many groundbreaking accomplishments that have assisted the development of today's space program and our growing knowledge in the field of space and aeronautics. Most notably, he played a crucial role as flight director for the first lunar landing with Apollo 11 in 1969. And then in 1970, he served as flight director for Apollo 13 and played a pivotal role to return the rocket and 3 astronauts safely to Earth. It is very fitting that an airport, our airport, now bears his name. And now that this airport bears your name, Mr. Krantz, and its success is likely important to you, we want you to know that we are dedicated to the enhancement, success, and growth of this airport. We have seen several accomplishments over the past few years of which our team is proud, and we will continue to build on these accomplishments as we look towards the future. One such success is the reestablishment of air cargo operations, a strategic focus of this airport. On March 18th, Amazon Air arrived at Eugene F. Krantz Toledo Express Airport. The Amazon Air Toledo Gateway is expected to create over 100 new jobs for our region, and we are pleased to report that after less than 2 months, Amazon has already increased its daily flight activity. As one of only 2 Amazon Air gateways in the state of Ohio, this accomplishment positively impacts our airport and the economic development connectivity to the region. Another accomplishment and strategic focus is our regional aviation education and maintenance programs. Toledo Public Schools has administered a highly reputable aviation program since 1978 to prepare high school students for a career in aviation mechanics. Most recently, they announced a partnership with Delta Airlines geared towards supplying maintenance and engineering support for Delta's largest fleet of aircraft. This partnership is only the second of its kind in the United States. In addition to these successes within the Toledo Public School Aviation Program, the Federal Aerospace Institute opened its doors at the airport last fall to provide an adult aviation program where graduates will receive an airframe and power plant rating certification, allowing them to work on any aircraft in the world. Both programs are significant because the aviation industry is anticipating a substantial loss in aviation mechanics and pilots over the next 10 to 15 years, and they will be crucial in helping to fill that gap. The Toledo Public School and the Federal Aerospace Institute's complementary program will make the Eugene F. Krantz Toledo Express Airport a leader in aviation education across the country. Passenger service has been and continues to be a primary focus of the Port Authority, as we reported 7 consecutive years of passenger growth from 2012 to 2019, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. As I returned on Thursday from meetings with airline representatives in Savannah, Georgia, in our continued efforts to retain and attract new air service to Eugene Krantz Toledo Express Airport, I remain confident that our continuous effort will prove beneficial. As the community continues to resume air activity, this airport will be positioned to meet their traveling needs. Lastly, I am proud to announce that our former gift shop on the terminal's first floor has been renovated into a dedication and business center honoring Mr. Krantz. We hope that you will all have an opportunity to visit the business center on your next trip out to the Eugene F. Krantz Toledo Express Airport. Again, on behalf of our board of directors and my colleagues, I would like to thank you, Mr. Krantz, for your attendance today and the opportunity to honor you on this momentous occasion. Thank you, everyone. Now I'd like to introduce Lucas County Commissioner Gary Byers. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Tina and Pete, my fellow commissioners, I want to welcome everyone and extend also my thanks to Gene Kranz for his willingness to participate, for his service to our country and our community. I was reflecting this morning on what it was really like to do the job that you did. And obviously I can't have any appreciation of it, but just, these things that we all carry in our pockets. These phones have more computing power than NASA, all of NASA had back in 1969. To accomplish the things that they did is almost overwhelming. And the fact that they were willing to risk life and limb for the goals that they set is something of a model that I think we all should look at. The simple words of honesty, accountability, and dedication to excellence. That's a lesson not only for NASA, but it's a lesson for our community. And if we simply aspire to those goals, I guarantee you our community will be better. Thank you. I wish Mr. Krantz good luck to you. And it is an honor and a pleasure to be with you this morning, sir. Thank you. Next we have Toledo Mayor Wade Katzkevich.
Gary may also have mentioned that those phones that now dominate our lives, the technology for them is only possible because of the space program and the satellites. It's so much more than just putting a man on the moon, although that was pretty impressive as well. I want to give recognition to a few people that may have not had the opportunity to be recognized. Yes, it's true, members of City Council are here. I think they deserve to be called out by name and recognized for their work. Councilwoman Venice Williams, Councilwoman Tiffany Whitman. I saw Councilwoman Katie Moline, and I think we'll be not hearing from her, but maybe hearing from her a little later, our newest member of council, Councilwoman Teresa Morris. If I missed a council member, I will hear about it, but I don't see it. I want to thank Thomas for his words and his partnership. The Port Authority has been a fantastic partner, not just in helping plan today's wonderful event, but in all that they do and are doing to make this airport all it can be. I think his board members deserve recognition. I see Bill Carroll, I see John Zutch, I'm sorry. I see David Fleetwood and Jim Tushman. If I missed, and I'm sorry, the chairwoman of the board, Sharon Spire, is here. If I missed a board member, I'll hear about it later. But based on my review of the crowd, I think those are the board members of the Port Authority who are here. And when the members of the Ohio legislature were introduced, yes, it is true, Mike Sheehy is here and Lisa Zabecki is here, but we shouldn't forget State Representative Paula Hicks Hudson is also here. She also has the distinction of being a former mayor of the city of Toledo. There's a lot of good things happening in Toledo right now, and many of those things began during Paula's tenure as mayor, and Paula is responsible for so many of the good things happening here, and I want to make sure that she is recognized on this wonderful day. Our universe is trillions of years old. Our Earth is billions of years old. And for the roughly 300,000 or 400,000 years that human beings have been around, they looked to the heavens. They looked to the stars and to the moon and dreamed and wondered and hoped that for the hundreds of thousands of years of human history, we looked upward. But for all but the last 120 or so of those years, we were tethered to the Earth. We couldn't even fly in an airplane, much less try to reach those heavens. It's a core need of the human experience to reach and to look and to hope and to wonder. And yet for most of our 100,000s of years on this earth, we were stuck to the earth. But about 120 years ago, two brothers from Dayton, Ohio took the first step. And in Kitty Hawk, they flew an airplane for the first time. And when innovation came, it came quickly. Because less than 6 years later, a man from New Concord, Ohio, named John Glenn, was orbiting the Earth. 7 years later, another Ohioan from Wapakoneta, named Neil Armstrong, was standing on the surface of the moon. And he was put there due to the leadership and on a mission organized by a Toledoan named Gene Kranz. It is the most amazing accomplishment in the history of humankind that we went from not being able to even fly in an airplane to standing on the surface of the moon in less than 70 years. And it took incredible innovation to do that, and talent and hard work. And we are lucky, those of us of a certain age, to have been alive during that time, when hundreds of thousands of years of hope and wonder culminated in achieving what man has always wanted. And it is important to know that it was a Toledoan who helped make that happen. It is, in my judgment, the greatest accomplishment in the history of the human race. And I am not exaggerating when I say that among the, 15 or 20 people most responsible for putting a human being on the moon, Toledoan Gene Kranz is on that list. Now, Copernicus is probably on that list. Wernher von Braun is probably on that list. But guess what? Gene Kranz is on that list. He accomplished something that humanity had wanted to do for hundreds of thousands of years. And we should celebrate that as Toledoans, and we should know that. It shouldn't surprise us that the greatest accomplishment in human history was brought to us, at least in part, by a Toledoan, because Toledoans can do anything, and have done everything. Over the years, we've made glass, and we've made automobiles. Heck, we invented the Jeep. What's the Jeep? Well, it's what General Eisenhower said was the machine that helped us win World War II. We make parts for cars and transmissions, and oh, by the way, we also can put a man on the moon. Because not only did Toledo and Gene Kranz lead in that work, the elevators that took those astronauts from the ground 360 feet up in the air were made on Spencer Street over off the Anthony Wayne Trail at Houghton Elevator. And when those astronauts got to outer space, their suits were lined with Owens Corning made fibers to protect themselves from the hostility of outer space. Toledoans can do anything, and we should know that, and we should celebrate that. Whenever a Toledoan wants to do something, he or she will get it done, even in the face of hardship. This airport is a study of how when Toledoans want something to happen, they'll make it happen. When this airport was built in 1955, it was rare among the airports in our country that was built without 1 penny of federal support. Congress passed legislation in 1946 to make it easier for cities around the country to build airports. And there was a 50-50 match. If the local folks would put up half the money, the federal government would put in the other half. Toledo applied for that money in the early 50s and was tired of waiting for the bureaucrats to unshackle it, and finally said, the heck with it, we'll do it ourselves. And they raised the money to pay for this all by themselves, because it was important to them. They knew that an airport isn't just a means to get people to move around. It's also a key aspect of economic growth. But what the federal government giveth, the federal government can taketh away. And in the 1970s, airline deregulation unfortunately changed the game for airlines and airports. Not because of anything the Port Authority did or didn't do. These are national forces at work. And really what it created were airports and communities like Atlanta that became huge winners, but communities like those that I listed, the Daytons, where the Wright brothers were from, the smaller communities, flyover country, that were left behind. An airport should be thought of almost like a post office or the interstate highway system. You wouldn't have an interstate highway system that only goes to Atlanta and Detroit and Chicago and LA and makes it hard to get to the other places. Just like you wouldn't only have mail service in the biggest cities. And yet because of deregulation, we now have an environment where only the biggest and wealthiest communities have airports that can sustain the economic growth that we work so hard to achieve. Now happily, even though that happened, doesn't mean that we are doomed to forever live in that world. We have a federal government now that appears to envision a more robust role of federal leadership. And by the way, both parties seem to have embraced that. I am heartened that our new Secretary of Transportation, actually my old friend and colleague, Pete Buttigieg from just over the road in South Bend, Indiana, comes from a city in flyover country. And maybe as infrastructure bills are written and policy is developed, maybe that mistake of the 1970s can be corrected, regardless of what the politicians in Washington do or don't do for us. I know that Toledo and Toledoans will persevere and succeed and triumph, because we always have, even though it hasn't always been easy. We have faced setbacks, we have faced hard times, but all cities do, all people do. Gene Krantz did. Gene Krantz did not have an easy life, I don't necessarily think. His father died when he was young. He had to work at least 2, or was it 3 jobs, while he was a student at Central Catholic to help his family. He did two different jobs before the school day started, and then with the help of the nuns who worked hard to make sure he wasn't tardy, they let him get to school a little late, and they let him leave a little early because he had a 3rd job that he had to do after school. I will resist the temptation to say my own son has a hard time cleaning the dinner table, and there were other Toledoans who maybe worked a little, but the point is, it wasn't always easy. He wanted to go to Annapolis, the Naval Academy, but didn't quite get in. He didn't quit, he didn't give up. He kept working and battling and fighting and not taking no for an answer. His story is Toledo's story. We've all had hard times, we all face adversity. Question is, how do we overcome it? And maybe to paraphrase Lord Darlington, whose North Star and bright light was Lady Windermere. From time to time, we've all been in the gutter, but some of us are looking up at the stars. Gene Kranz looked at the stars. He dreamed, he believed, and he set a path for all Toledoans, for as long as this airport is here and as long as this city exists, to learn and to be guided on how you can make a difference, how you can overcome adversity, and do no less than achieve the greatest achievement in human history, putting a man on the moon. A Toledoan did that, and we can learn from that, and we can grow from it, and that is why it is important that this airport will have this man's name on it forever. It's an honor to be here today, to be with him and share in this moment, and I hope that he is deriving as much joy and honor here as we are in honoring him. With that, I would like to introduce Douglas Wheelock, who is a colonel, the U.S. Army retired. He is our next speaker, and I'm hoping he comes up here now. Good, okay. And we'd like to hear from him.
Hi, my name is Doug Wheelock. I don't have a speech written. I just want to share some things from the heart on behalf of NASA Flight Operations, the Astronaut Office, our astronauts that are in space now on the space station, orbiting the Earth and surviving moment by moment based on and closely tied to the legacy that this man, Mr. Krantz, Mr. Gene Kranz, we call him Flight, by the way, so I'll just refer to him as Flight. I hope that's okay, Flight. That's quite okay. So everybody calls me Wheels at NASA. It's because of my last name is Wheelock. I wish it was because I was a fast runner or something like that. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. I was 9 years old when Flight put Apollo 11 on the surface of the moon. And I was just from this little rural town, and but we watched it on a little black and white TV, and went into school that next year. I was going into 4th grade that next school year, and we had a brand new teacher there in this small town. I think I had 15 kids in my 4th grade class in this tiny little town, and her name was Christine West, and she was right out of teaching school. And so she came, we always kidded her that she had to come to this little town to pay penance for her education degree. But she showed up there and she said, "Who saw the moon landing?" And of course, I raised my hand. She said, "One day you could do that too." And we thought, this woman is crazy. She has no idea where she is in this tiny little town, this ordinary town, this ordinary school with ordinary kids. And you know, I went through many years, decades actually, of my life, looking at my ordinary beginnings. And then I landed at NASA in the summer of 1998. And I got a chance, my first chance, to meet Flight and to meet Neil Armstrong and meet the old pioneers that had put those craft on the moon, had saved the crew during Apollo 13. And I remember talking, and my knees are shaking right now. Actually, when my knees were shaking when I first met Flight that summer, and as we were talking, I remember just kind of in the room with various pioneers that were there that were involved with the Apollo missions. I was a brand new astronaut. I think I had my blue flight suit for like 3 days, you know. And I always kid that I showed up at NASA, I was like, "I've got my blue flight suit, where's my rocket?" You know. And what I learned from Gene Kranz was that I was not ready. There were some important things that I needed to learn as an astronaut and a space explorer. And I learned those things from Gene Kranz. But that very same night, that same reunion that we were in, Neil Armstrong was there, and I remember talking to him, and I said, what am I going to say to Neil Armstrong, you know? But I wanted to know how he felt as a superhero. I wanted to know how Gene Kranz felt as a superhero, because I was just an ordinary kid from an ordinary place. I remember how I felt. It changed my life. You know, it changed the very trajectory of my life. And so I remember Neil Armstrong saying very clearly, he said, you know, I asked him, I said, did you, when you were standing there, were you on the moon, did you think of what a profound moment it was in human history that nothing would ever be the same? I mean, I grew up much like you did probably. It's like hearing the old adage, when we thought of excuses why we couldn't do something, we'd always hear, we could put a man on the moon, but we can't, you know, fill in the blank, you know. So, and so Neil Armstrong said to me that, you know, I thought about my, you know, I asked him if he thought about what a profound moment it was in human history. He said, you know, I thought about those engineers that built that rocket, and those rocket scientists. I thought about our flight control team that got us safely there and safely back. I put my thumb up and covered up what I could see of the Earth from the lunar surface. I thought about my teachers. But most of all, I thought about to myself, how does an ordinary little boy from Wapakoneta, Ohio, end up standing on the moon? And I thought to myself, he chuckled, we all chuckled. I said, wait a second, that's a familiar story, because we're all just ordinary kids from ordinary places with these extraordinary dreams for our life. The same is true for flight. You know, where do we find these people? We find them in a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio. We find them in small towns like New Concord and Wapakoneta, and we find them right here in Toledo. Ordinary kids from ordinary places with extraordinary dreams for what they can accomplish, what they can achieve, what they can do as a member of a team. When I first started at NASA, my first assignment was as a Capcom, which is in mission control, by the way. Sits right next to the flight director, and my knees are shaking right now, actually, because I remember flight, because it was actually kind of a moment where we were kind of picking up pieces from some mistakes that we had made, and it was Gene Kranz stepped into a room and talked to us about toughness and competence. And toughness and competence are the price of admission onto the floor of mission control. And believe me, those words were ringing in my ears when I walked into mission control. And then it was years later, what I didn't understand and what Gene Kranz taught me was that, you know, we can expect those in others, toughness and competence, but we can't expect that in others until we've mastered those in ourselves. And that was a very, very important part of leadership that I learned from this man, coming from this ordinary place, Toledo, Ohio. You know, it was just about that same year when I first started working as a Capcom. First of all, this man's words echo through those hallowed halls of NASA and mission control. His words and his quotes are plastered on the wall, you know, pictures of those old days when we all celebrate. You know, we could put a man on the moon, but we can't do fill in the blank. And so years later, you know, there was a quote that I saw there that's about, you know, that our mission as space explorers, as flight directors, as flight controllers, as astronauts, as explorers, our mission is to always be aware and to know that suddenly and unexpectedly we will find ourselves in a position where our role, what we do and what we fail to do, is going to end up with ultimate consequences. And those words rang true for me on the space station in 2010 when we had a critical failure. And I fell back on my training and the lessons I learned from this man to be able to survive on a long duration space mission. And so, flight, I salute you. Thank you for all your life of dedication to NASA. your dedication and your care for our flight controllers and our flight directors. And I wanted to share another one of your disciples. I'm going to invite Dr. Bob Dempsey up to the stage. Bob is one of our, well, I can't call him a new flight director now because he's an old grizzled veteran like me now. So, but Bob is actually a flight director, so we call Bob Flight as well. So, Dr. Bob, could you say a few words for Flight?
It is a great pleasure as a current flight director to be at this moment. As a flight director, it is always very hard to tell people in the public what I do, but I am able to point to the depiction of Gene Kranz in the movie Apollo 13, and then everyone immediately knows what I do. And that's a very apt description, because when I was a kid and I saw the astronauts bouncing around on the moon, it was the inspiration of Flight, as we call him, and the people in mission control, and I'll emphasize that's the mission control that Gene built. That's what inspired people like me. And years later, when I got the privilege, I mean, I was beside myself when I got hired to work in that mission control. And as Wheels just said, you know, when I got there, we learned the foundations that Gene Kranz had built there. Tough and competent were definitely part of them, as is failure is not an option. We truly live and breathe this and base that on the other leadership skills that he taught us. And I don't know if it was that 2010 day, but I was a flight director on console, and we often describe the job as hours of tedium punctuated by moments of terror. And it was around 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and I was sitting on console, and our little alarm board lights up like a Christmas tree. Half the systems on the space station had just shut down. Now, this is multiple $100 billion spacecraft and people like Wheels on board. And never once did I or the team panic or worry if we were going to fix this problem. We knew that we had been prepared because of leaders like Gene Kranz. And we got it all sorted out, and things worked out. Recently, we hired some new flight directors, and I've been having the privilege of training them again in how to be tough and competent and realize failure is not an option. So while today you are honoring Gene Kranz as a local Toledoan that's done good, I can assure you that his legacy is continuing on at NASA, and this is a very worthy honor. So congratulations, Gene.
Wheels and Flight. I picked the wrong career to get a cool nickname, I guess. Ohio is home to many pioneers of spaceflight, as you've heard about already this morning. You immediately, of course, think of John Glenn and Neil Armstrong, Jim Lovell, Judith Resnick, Wheels, and 20 other Buckeye astronauts logging 22,000 hours in space, including 3 flights to the moon. But Toledo is home to Gene Kranz, the man there from Project Mercury to the shuttle program as America won the space race. Gene Kranz is a true American hero, not just for what he accomplished throughout his storied career, but also for leading the entire team of thousands of mission-critical support personnel that put men into space and returned them safely home. His presence moved NASA forward for decades, set high standards for leaders in all industries, and inspired young aviation enthusiasts here at home, students passing through the same halls he did at Central Catholic. Now, of course, I could literally spend the next hour going through a list of his accomplishments. You know the story. He served his country flying missions in Korea for the Air Force, joined NASA in 1960 as one of the Project Mercury original assistant flight directors, served as flight director in the Gemini and Apollo programs that put man on the moon. As deputy director of NASA Mission Ops, he oversaw the shuttle program. He was there, leading the way during some of our country's brightest triumphs and some of our most heartbreaking tragedies. from the first man on the moon to the last, to making missions into space almost commonplace today. 4 presidential ranking awards, recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian award. He represents the best of America and proof of what we can all accomplish if we are tough and competent. He's from right here in Toledo, and for that, we're all very proud. Truly honored today to present to you now, Mr. Eugene F. Krantz.
Good morning. I really thank you, and it's really hard to follow all of the speakers I had. Many years ago, I was asked to speak at an astronaut reunion. And this was tough, because here I was with the generation of people that I worked with and flew during Project Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and early shuttle. It was tough to find the words that would fit the entire generation of astronauts that was with me when I began. You know, it was not easy to get into aviation and space. I grew up, as you know, in Toledo, Ohio. I lived in West Toledo. And my father died when I was young. And yesterday we drove by the house where we lived, and I talked about my mother crowded 4 of us in 1 bedroom and rented out the rest of the rooms for the military personnel that were in transit during World War II. They were amazed at this small house, how many people would get in there. I said, well, when it really got tough, we had an airing deck out back where everybody would hang out their clothes and basically air them. And we had cots we could sleep out there and right on down the line, so that way we could stretch. But this was a lesson, not only in leadership, but in what life's all about. You know, Jackie Robinson once said, life is not important except for the impact it has in other lives. And as a result of this, you know, I thought about all these people in my life who are so important. I talked to my mother. She was a German, a tough German, Catholic German. And when we had trouble, she basically mustered the family to go do the work, find jobs, but above all, get educated. Get your education, live your dream. And this became key because I was a young kid and I would ride my bike out to Franklin Airport and I'd watch the airplane just like today. I could watch them take off. You know, listening to the aircraft take off and land today is really great. We got trains out there. This is like being at home. I'm in Toledo. I'm in West Toledo. And all this is happening around me and I want to become a part of this. And I carried this dream, and I was carrying jobs, as they said earlier, and the nuns in Central Catholic covered me because I was carrying papers in the morning and working at A&P as a stock boy at night. And they covered my absence, arriving late, and I would have to hitchhike down Cherry Street to school. But they covered for me, but they knew I wanted to be a naval aviator. I wanted to get in there and I wanted to fly airplanes. They coached me for Annapolis and I got the appointment and I failed the physical because I'd been living in brownies and chocolate milk at A&P for a year. Well, that is where I first found out about failure is not an option. Because 3 nuns picked me up and carried me. And I got the education because of them. They found a loan through the Aeronautics Association for deceased veterans of World War I. And I went to parks. It was a small college in East St. Louis, Illinois. I'm getting weepy here. You know, it's interesting. I'll talk about this later on, but basically, I'd hitchhike down there, and I would ride with truck drivers until you had driven in a truck from Toledo to St. Louis. You haven't really lived, because these truck drivers want to talk, and they want to talk to stay awake, and you learn history. And you learn history of the Dust Bowl, and you learn history of the Depression. And these were things that I never knew about. My family knew about it, but I didn't. The Small Aviation College, one of my heroes, basically went through there, Francis Cabreski, Colonel Francis Cabreski, top living ace. And he is one of the 27,000 students that went through that little school. It was amazing going to school in the PT-17s, where fly overhead, and the school wasn't air conditioned, you had all this noise. But basically, you found that this was your place and your time. And when I talked to the astronauts, I talked about our time. That was the theme, because we all had a similar path growing up. We were the paper boys in World War II. We ran the streets yelling, extra, 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 read all about it. The Japs are Doolittle bombs Tokyo. And we lived that. We collected paper. We were putting on board trucks, because we didn't have all these safety regulations kids have nowadays. We'd go on board trucks and we'd collect scrap metal and paper and put it in there. But this was the way of living. But again, this dream stayed alive at the Franklin Airport. And pretty soon, my mother was very tolerant of me. I started hitchhiking to Cleveland for the air show. And I saw the first accident they had there. It was Odom. He was flying Jacqueline Cochran's airplane called the Begin. And basically you could see the smoke off in the distance, but that is where you quickly learned about the risks of this business I wanted to get in. But they moved the air shows up to Detroit, and pretty soon now we had the big air races. We had the Thompson and the Bendix up there, etc. And boy, I was really pumped. Aviation was in my blood, and it stayed with me. Now when I said Central, I didn't know how fate would basically cover for me, because I used to read the pulp magazines. And the pulp magazines were talking about rockets and space. And I wrote a term paper that is in Central Catholic today, the original, called The Design and Possibilities of an Interplanetary Rocket. And believe it or not, I got the location where we'd be launching from, basically the rough flight path, but I only got a 98% in that paper, and I was wondering what I failed. Where did I make my miss? Well, anyway, that resides in Central today, but again, this idea carried before. But basically, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. That was it. So I went through the Small Aviation College and got a degree in math. I was an aeronautical engineer. And then I went to work for my mother was the most influential person in my life. The second most influential person in my life was a guy by the name of Harry Carroll. Well, he was inspirational. He basically led the flight test data reduction people at McDonnell. And basically, I spent 9 months with him while I was waiting my slot in the flying class. And Harry was I did not know that at the time, he was a World War II B-17 pilot. And for anybody who's been in aviation, they know about the raids in Ploesti. And he was one of the Ploesti raiders. He flew 2 missions with that as a target in Romanian oil fields. And at that time, I didn't know that they gave aviators, pilots, credit for 2 missions for just flying 1 mission to Ploesti in the oil fields. And then that was with I think it was 18th Air Force, and then he got shipped over to the 8th Air Force. He flew another 27 missions with them. He flew about 40 missions. Got his crew home safely. He bellied in several times. at emergency airfields. Then he came back to the States. He still went through fighting the wars. And he went into B-29s and was flying out of Saipan. But it was interesting how this guy entered the war. He got home to Chicago where he lived, and he went to work. He couldn't find a job because there were plenty of aviators getting out, so he went to basically a candy factory, and he'd sort out the candy as they passed down the production line there. But he again had this drive to go to college, go to school. And he went to work at McDonald's. And basically he went through flight test. He was basically worked on the external tank development testing down at Mizzou. So basically he was the inspiration, but basically that now got me into flying training, and I went through Spence Air Base, Moultrie, Georgia. Basically I now started living my dream. I was the first in the T-34, T-28 program that went through there. And then I went to work for, I went to Laughlin, got my jet instructor. And my jet instructor, Wendell Dobbs, was a wild card. And it was interesting, I could not figure out, there was no curriculum. I was looking for books, I was looking for some kind of a plan. And we'd spend the first 20 minutes flying, and then we'd get into what we call air combat maneuvers. He'd get a call and say, hey, yep, and they'd call, we'd meet a rendezvous point, and we'd fly, and I learned what I would learn later at fighter weapons school. To really fly these airplanes on the very margin of their performance. Well, it was interesting. I found out that he had come back from Korea. He was one of these guys in a C-47. He would actually manually light the flares and throw them out over the front lines, what we call a lamplighter mission, so that basically the Americans could see the forces that were attacking them. So then I went through fighter weapons school. That was really Valhalla of aviation. And there flew I was scheduled for the F-86, F-100 program. But basically the Huns had stability problems. Very difficult aircraft to fly. They basically were being reserved for the instructors and the Thunderbirds, which were just talking up at that time. And basically I went through what they call 86H, but that was a marvelous fighter airplane. Got my assignment down to Myrtle Beach, and believe it or not, I was now flying for Francis Cabrisky down there. And he was a group commander at that base, and boy, I was hard to kite. Cabrisky was interesting. He believed in his troops. In fact, that's one of the things all of my leaders I had, both in flight test, I went through 2 flight test programs, but basically they always had some identifier that basically said, I am here for you. And this was true. He was always in the ranks. He was in the mess hall, down on the flight line. He was in the maintenance shop running down the line. But he was there for not only his pilots, but everybody that kept him flying. The Air Force made a mistake. I just finished transitioning to the F-100, but I had a lot of 86 times, so they shipped me to an 86 unit in Korea. And a lot of people would think that you're going from the top performing airplane in the world, supersonic straight level, now to an airplane, the 86, but this was the MiG killer over in Korea. And I can't think of anything better for a young pup than to fly in the skies over Korea, where all the aces flew. When I came back, I did a tour. We roamed the Pacific area down there, did a tour with the 7th Infantry as an air controller. And I was surprised that after the tour, they had not established any techniques, procedures for close air support. And it was interesting, I wrote the manual that we used for the 58th Fighter Bomber because nobody taught me how to use an artillery compass, or to read the Japanese land maps that were all in meters that were developed in 1930. But basically that was the tools that we had. But it's interesting seeing it as a pilot and seeing it from the ground where they're actually deploying their weapons, making their assaults. Came back to the States, and I went into reserve status, and I ended up in the flight test down at Holloman Air Force Base, and this was probably the 3rd most important person in my life. He is the guy that really made me a leader. guy by the name of Rolf Sailor. He's a Marine, combat veteran of World War II. And basically, he assigned me to the B-52 for the flight test, because at that time, the B-52 aircraft, the Soviets had developed surface-to-air missile capabilities, and it was really a question, how are these airplanes going to penetrate Soviet airspace? So I spent 2.5 years developing the technology. I had the control of the bomb bay, and you want to talk about a blast. Everything that went in there was mine. I knew everything in there. And it was interesting. We did separation studies, we did tuck studies, we did noise studies, we did J-85 engine development for the people who fly the T-38s, because we had a trapeze we'd swing out there and run the J-85 out and do air starts and all that kind of stuff. And it was just a great program, and I had that. I was 27 years old, and I was running the program, and I thought, boy, can't get any better than this. But then the program ended. It was time to go out to Edwards Air Force Base. And I could have gone out in the F-4 program, Phantom II. But I saw an advertisement in Aviation Week that said they're forming the Space Task Group and they're looking for qualified engineers to determine the feasibility of putting a man in space. And I thought, holy cow, what a job. And I reported for duty, and it was really strange, because the Space Task Group was very rich in flight test experience. Boy, they put me in a room. Walt Williams was across the hall from me. He's the boss of the flight test at what used to be the high-speed test station. I had Sig Schobert, who had the D-558 going for Mach 2. John Hodge, who was basically the test director on the number 6 aircraft for the Aeronautics, which is the top performing airplane in the world. I was in heaven now with all these flight test guys, but there were no workers. I mean, basically, we were the entire Space Task Group operation. There were 4 of us in there. And I got sent down to the Cape. We had what are called hired hands. We'd borrow people from engineering, et cetera, to come and sit consoles. They'd show up for the console, and they'd do such things. They didn't know how to turn the analog recorder on down there. But this was the way we started. I was sent down to the Cape 2 weeks after I arrived on the job. I was sent to the Cape to make the countdown for the first Redstone mission. And boy, I didn't know rockets, I didn't know spacecraft, but I was a fast learner. I talked to people in the spacecraft side, I talked to the launch people, talked to range safety, got together with the comm and telemetry people in mission control. And the launch day arrived, and boy, we hit the fire command, the engine smoked, and the rocket was still on the launch pad. We launched the escape tower. So this was my introduction to the space program, where I could go on and on and on and on and on, war stories. But this was really an incredible life. And it really started becoming very personal to me. Because as time went on, as I said, I was one of 3 people that started this thing. So I had all these. You talk about the technology of what's in your phone. Good Lord, we were flying a spacecraft moving 5 miles a second with low-speed teletype and a communication system that basically was a cable out to the Europe and another cable out to the Pacific, and basically we actually communicate UHF-wise to tracking stations around the world. So if I wanted something done in Australia, I would relay it through 2 or 3 sites and hoping that the guy in Australia knew what we wanted, and then he'd relay it back 2 or 3 times to me to say, yeah, this is what we just done. But things got better, and technology came, we got satellites, but basically now they gave me the job to develop flight operations. And this was a blast, and I'm going to deviate from this because I could talk forever in this. But basically, we moved, and it was, I don't know if you're familiar with World War II and the Patton's Army when they had to change and move out of a battle and move and basically go up and relieve Bastogne. Well, that was what I felt like, because we were down launching Wally Schirra. They told us to move to Houston. Now we're right in the middle of the Space Mercury program. And they say, well, we're going to move the entire organization to a different city and different facilities and find your homes, find some temporary quarters. And right after Wally Schirra's mission, boy, we packed up our station wagon, hitched the U-Haul behind it, went down, and I left my wife in a motel. And basically went to work there. I basically went in a big warehouse down there. But it was very interesting because this was the closeness now that we needed to build this tough and competent organization. And I had a controller. Everybody looks. My recruiting area in building mission operations was the central United States. What they did is they assigned each NASA center a recruiting zone so we didn't overlap other people trying to get the same people. And I had a controller come in by the name of Jim Bates. Read talking too long. We have to go short. I'll try to amplify this. We had a controller come in named Jim Bates from a small college in Oklahoma, Southwest Oklahoma State College. And it was interesting, he came in with a physics degree, and I was hiring all physics guys or military people because physics people knew how things worked. And we were still trying to figure out what were the jobs to do in mission control of spaceflight. And he brought in resumes from another dozen people. When I looked at those resumes, I found out all these young people I hired came from amazing places. I hired 3 Native Americans from the Rosebud Sioux organization up in the Dakotas that had been transferred down as kids to reservations in Oklahoma. I had a guy by the name of John Aaron, who is a legend in mission control, who was a hard scrabble farmer. His father was a rancher and farmer. And these people came in, and believe it or not, this one group produced 3 flight directors, 2 NASA's major engineers up at headquarters. But we had this group of people who had a work ethic that was incredible. And boy, if you get that kind of people, you can build a tough and competent organization. So that's basically what the business was for the majority of my time in NASA. Yeah, we talk about Apollo 11, and it was really, I won't say a thrill. You know, accountability for the flight director is pretty interesting because if you screw up, you're the guy that basically has to stand up and say, yeah, I screwed up. And it was interesting, the story of Apollo 11 really wasn't well told in any of the movies because I had a team of young people, a team of 17 controllers, and we built a document that we call mission rules, and basically our pre-planned decisions that basically provide us a sense of direction, the best engineering judgment, and things to do when things go wrong. And boy, on the Apollo 11, we had things going wrong big time. Because as the crew separated from the spacecraft, they did not fully depress the tunnel between the command service module and the lunar module, which is like performing a small maneuver. So now this moves our trajectory downrange. And we had dumb computers on board the spacecraft. They did not recognize that. And they did not propagate that error until later on. And basically the thing is that one of the first calls I get is, hey, flight, basically they recognize this as an aberration. We've got a radial velocity error and what we planned. And basically that allowed the flight control team to know we're probably going to land long. The crew had also done the landmark navigation as they're going through the surface. But the one critical rule that I had to exercise was, did we have enough communications to continue and land? And the Cape, the prior missions, if you're familiar with the lunar module, it's got 4 quads of thrusters down there. And the skin of the lunar module is like 2 thicknesses of aluminum foil that you use at home. And basically the thrusters, firing thrusters had been impinging on the skin. So down at the Cape, they put some scuppers underneath those, but didn't bother to include that in the design data we had for instructions and pointing the antennas. And what happened is when we were starting to our descent, the antenna was trying to point right through that, and throughout the entire preparation for the descent phase and during descent phase, I was making and we were making go-no-go decisions, sometimes the data that was stale by 20, 30 seconds. But we continued on because we didn't see any reason to terminate. As we got further down the line, we started having computer program alarms, and Neil was supposed to have looked out there, looked at his, where is the landing site, they have what they call a landing point designator, where the computer would tell them, if you look through the window, through this grid you have in the window, you'll see the landing site. But he was busy trying to fly the airplane. He was doing what every good pilot does. He's flying the airplane. And he waited until he was down around a couple thousand feet before he started looking for the landing point. Then he sees he's got a big crater. He has to decide whether he's going to overfly it or not. What's he going to do? About this time, my controller is telling me we're down a low level from a standpoint of fuel. And at this point, we start counting down seconds of fuel remaining. Our gas gauge in the lunar model did not read once it got below into the spherical part of the tank. So basically, we knew by testing that we had roughly 120 seconds of fuel at 30% throttle. So I got a guy with stopwatch in the front room and the back room, basically counting down. We get low level. And we're trying to estimate basically whether they're above or 30%, manually adding corrective terms into that. So now we're getting close to the landing point. Neil is trying to fly over and find a place to land. And it was really interesting to see this team hang together. I mean, it was, the trajectory team was right on, my systems guys were right on. I had a comm controller, and this all the way through this, he was basically tracking antenna pattern and trying to figure out what instructions to give to the crew. But basically we made it to the surface, and when we finally we went through, the world celebrated when we landed, except for the team in mission control. Because we had 3 stay-no-stay decisions we had to go. We had 3 times that were set up that if we had a problem, 2 minutes after landing, 8 minutes after landing, and 2 hours after landing, that if we had a problem, we could lift off and rendezvous with an active rendezvous at the propellant in the ascent stage. And we already know the story of Apollo 13, so I won't go into that. But the bottom line was I had the opportunity to continue to serve in mission control and build the teams. And throughout this entire time frame, NASA at those days was very personal. You grew up from the time of the Space Task Group with the leaders at the very top level. It was not unusual for me in my office, whether it be branch chief, division chief, or even director, to get a call directly from the director asking some question or providing an answer or giving in to tell you to give an attaboy to one of your people. So it was a relationship that was incredible. And I think this was one of the other keys. We had leadership top notch all through there. Well, basically I retired in '94. I unfortunately got crosswise with some of the people up at the headquarters, but it was time to get out of the business because burden to get back and start flying again had returned. I was building an aerobatic biplane in my garage, very tolerant. My wife allowed this to happen. It was basically, you couldn't bring groceries in from the garage for almost 2 years. You had to go around the front door. And when the babies were coming up, we had airplane wings and bedrooms up there, and I told them to make sure that they didn't, cut through the fabric. But I was building that. The basically I got involved with the Lone Star Flight Museum and got into the business of aircraft restoration, which was a lot of fun. And I won't say I got weak knees, but until you've serviced, maintained a Corsair where you're working in that gull wing, and if it's slippery after an air show or something like that, boy, you gotta be quick to grasp onto that thing, because interestingly enough, all the servicing for all the oil was right in front of the cockpit, so you're reaching over this trying to pour the oil in there at the fetus. So anyway, but that was it. It was, and then finally, one of the guys retired. You don't get into an air show crew unless somebody dies or retires. Well, a guy retired, and boy, I got on board the B-17. Now this is the airplane, the Harry Carroll flew, the B-17, and boy, until you're up in that guy humming. You see the business by which they synchronize these engines. I didn't know this, real pros. If you're in a 4-engine aircraft, basically the engines, what you do is you want to synchronize them so they have it all the way through flight, drives you nuts. So what you do is you get down, guide down in the bombardier area, and you look through the propeller discs. And basically what you want to do is if you get one engine synchronized, basically you got both, so you can see propellers in the other adjacent engine. You know, you're straightening them up, they're both synchronized, there's no motion there. Then you move over to the other side, and then a good pilot puts his feet on the floor, and he can feel the difference between these guys. And that way you get rid of it, you're going to be droning along hours in this aircraft. And boy, it sure gets rid of that irritant. But anyway, did that. I must have done, we went up to Oshkosh for 7 years in a row. And I can't think of anything more exciting than that. You know, you get down there and you're in between the runways during the show, the whole show's overhead. And you ride some very famous people in there. We had some of the great aviation artists that would ride with us. We had Bertie Lake down there as one of the commanders, Air Force commanders, wrote the book 12 O'Clock High. And we'd sit out in the runways in between the shows, we'd just be talking out there. The whole show's going overhead. I mean, right then, you know, this is when air show performers, they play music during this thing. The people would come out of the aircraft, they do the aerobatics, that sucker, and you say, holy cow, this is it. I've been living in heaven. But B-17, I finally had to call it a day. I finished my aerobatic biplane, beautiful little thing. But unfortunately, it never flew. It got caught in a hurricane. And unfortunately, it was uninsured at that time. But I finally I saw those aircraft go over from the Guard today. And I got speaking at air shows with Jim Lovell and some of the other crew members. And this turned into a blast because if they wanted me to speak at an air show, I had to get a ride with the performers. And boy, I had the best jet team. I flew with them. I won't say the Blue Angels were the best jet team of slip, but they were a damn good jet team. And I flew with the Chapman Mancuso team, which is interesting. They fly the extra 300s. And they fly an air show canopy to canopy, so one guy is always upside down. And when you're doing barrel rolls over the top, I mean, just going vertical up there and then do hammerheads and come back down. I mean, that is spectacular. But anyway, back to Toledo. My life began here. Began in aviation. And I wrote that story about space. But I didn't get back into space until something, a change in life. I didn't like it right down the line. But it turned out to be one of those good things that happen if you're willing to make the best out of the events that you have. So it was interesting to be here today. I'd like to thank Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank the event sponsors, Toledo Blade. And some of the kids drove them up in the private aircraft today, coming up here, which is really a drill for them. And I enjoyed the flyby. And I just enjoy celebrating Toledo with you. One final word. It's if the Toledoans can do it all. We went down through where we lived, Ohio, down in Oliver Street. And it wasn't the same as, but basically Oliver Street was, I've got a lot of the Kranzes here, but that's where the Kranz clan really originated, because grandfather P.J. Kranz basically would call his sons together and said, we're going to play poker, or we're going to play pinochle, and they will all report for duty. And they drank a lot of beer, and that was where I found that was a pleasant refreshment. The other thing was we went out to West Toledo, and that was where I hitchhiked out to the Franklin Airport. But we had this gentleman there went out the house. The gentleman was sitting there with his dog in front of the house. And he wondered what people were taking pictures out there, what they were. So we went up to talk to him. And it was interesting. We had a bit of talk, and then we went over to St. Agnes, and pretty soon he's running across through the sky. He's got the newspaper. He had seen the picture in the paper about the airport opening today. So you got one real fan there in Toledo, West Toledo. So I'm sort of getting croaky here. I threw my script away, as you can tell. Thank you.
I don't know what you give the man who's just had an airport named after him and has already received the highest honor a citizen of this country can receive, but we have members of Congress who would like to try, and representatives of the governor who have gifts and proclamations and flags. So let's start with Congressman Bob Latta.
Thanks very much, Mayor. I tell you what, I can sit here all day and listen. And it's a true honor and a privilege to be with you today. Yeah, my dad was born in West during the Depression, one of 6 kids, and first to graduate from high school. He's the same type of background. And my dad told my sister and me one thing: get as much education as you get in your life, because it's one thing they can never take away from you. That's right. Dad also said another thing to me, and it's what you said made me think about my dad. He said, always remember this, that he who makes excuses is seldom good for anything else. And what you put forward at NASA, and with your career and your experiences, not only in the military, and to our nation, that's why we're here today. I was 13 at 69, sat there all night to watch that moon landing. Remember Apollo 13, and it was never the thought that they were going to get home. And so all I can say, it's a privilege, it's an honor for me to present with you a flag that had flown over the United States Capitol for you, for your accomplishments, and for the naming of the airport in your honor. Thank you very much.
My name is Teresa Morris, and I am representing Congresswoman Capter, who could not be here today. But I wanted to see, is Matt Walsh in the audience? Matt, thank you very much. You wrote many letters to the mayor, to the Congresswoman, and said, why isn't this named after Eugene Krantz? So if that shows you your tenacity, it shows that Congresswoman Capter can create a World War II memorial. It shows that Eugene Krantz can go to the moon. It's amazing what Toledoans can do, Mayor. You are correct, Mayor. Toledoans can do anything. So it's my honor, on behalf of the citizens of the 9th Congressional District, to present you the Certificate of Special Congressional Recognition presented to Eugene F. Krantz in recognition of outstanding and invaluable service to the community, signed Congresswoman Marcy Capter. And just a shout out, as my other position as a member of City Council, to District 6 and District 1 for West Toledo, Side Pride. And this is also a space pen. And now you probably have a lot of space pens, right? But I'll tell you, this is a U.S. House of Representatives space pen. Yeah?
Okay.
And it's to write your next chapter.
Okay.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Good morning, morning, everyone. My name's Krista Lutman, and I'm Governor Mike DeWine's Northwest Regional Representative. And the governor and lieutenant governor send their apologies. They couldn't attend this morning, but they were so pleased to learn that we have renamed our airport in honor of one of the true legends from the state of Ohio and from West Toledo. I'm a West Toledoan myself. And this is really long, and I won't read everything, but it is now therefore we, Mike DeWine and John Husted, Governor and Lieutenant Governor of the state of Ohio, do hereby recognize the career accomplishments of Eugene F. Krantz and the honorable dedication of the Eugene F. Krantz Toledo Express Airport. So again, this has been a true honor to meet a living legend. And I remember being a little girl, 7 years old, almost 8, watching that moon landing, and I just couldn't believe what we were doing, and that you were from my town. So, thank you.
And finally, I know that Gene's beloved wife, Marta, couldn't be here today, but is watching on television or on the internet. And anyone who saw Apollo 13 or knows the history of NASA knows that she would make him a vest before the important missions. There were 3 teams, red team, white team, blue team, and you were white team. And so she would always, Marta, who is an outstanding seamstress, this is my understanding, would always make a white vest for each mission. So this, the woman in the very colorful dress there is named Dana Loeb. I don't know if she is as much a seamstress as Marta Kranz, but she helped us put together a Toledo themed vest for you with and with that, we will end today by also bestowing upon you the key to the city of Toledo, made with Libby glass from Ash Street in North Toledo, and just as a token of how proud we are to call you a native son, and how happy we are to be able to honor you like this today. So, key to the city of Toledo.
You know, a couple minor corrections on the information. I was not just called Flight. I was called the White Flight, and that got changed to the White Light.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here. I want to thank Scott Sands, our MC from WSPD, did a fantastic job. I want to thank Ignacio Messina, who did the planning behind the scenes. And when we went to lunch the other day, Gene referred to Ignacio as an ace, which as I understand it is high praise for a fighter pilot. So thank you everyone, and enjoy Gene Krantz Toledo Express Airport.
Oh, Mount Walsh.
Yeah, let me finish what
Thank you, Joan. You're welcome.
This is back.